Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Laurane McGlynn. I am a clinical psychologist and holotropic breathwork facilitator. And today I'm making a longer video, which is an introduction to holotropic breathwork. I'll be covering a little bit of history on Stan Grof, who's the founder of holotropic breathwork, and talk a little bit about the theory and the practice and the evolution of holotropic breathwork. So, holotropic breathwork was started by Stan Grof, who was a psychiatrist from Prague, Czechoslovakia. And originally he was interested in painting and drawing and wanted to work in animation. So just before he made the commitment to work in the film studios in Prague, a friend of his gave him a book called The Introductory Lectures on Psychoanalysis by Freud. And as the story goes, he started reading it in the evening and he couldn't put it down. And he read through the night and the next 2 days and decided, it's not going to be animated movies, I'm going to be a psychoanalyst. So that was the catalyst for him to enroll in medical school and study psychiatry. So as part of his training as a psychiatrist, he went into his own Freudian analysis as a client and found it very slow moving and became pretty disillusioned with the process. So even back then, he started developing an interest in exploring the revisioning and the understanding of the psyche and the model of psychiatry and psychology. So before I move forward, I just want to add too that I'll be using my notes for this talk because this is a much more extensive talk and I want to make sure I provide as much comprehensive information, accurate information as I can. So when Stan was in his 4th year of medical school, he started working as a student volunteer at the Psychiatric Research Institute in Prague. And this was right around the time when LSD came into the psychiatric clinic where he was working. And they received a package from Sandoz Pharmaceutical with a box of ampules of LSD 25, requesting that studies be conducted in order to determine whether the substance had therapeutic properties. So the Sandoz letter said, "We feel this could be used as an experimental psychosis." And what Stan says with the second part of the letter became his karma or his destiny, because it said that it could possibly be used as an unconventional training tool, allowing psychiatrists and psychologists to experience the inner world of their psychotic patients. So since Stan was a medical student, he couldn't participate in the studies with LSD as a patient, but during that time, Stan observed many LSD sessions facilitated by psychiatrists and psychologists. And eventually, Stan became the principal investigator of the program that systematically explored the therapeutic properties of LSD and other psychedelic substances. So after his graduation in 1956, he subsequently volunteered to participate in a research program which explored LSD as a tool for experiential training. So in his first LSD session, he was part of a research study, and he was dosed with LSD and exposed to very powerful strobe lights of different frequencies to measure the pharmacological effects of LSD when combined with exposure to powerful strobe lights to see if they could drive the brainwave patterns. And what he reported was, and again I'll quote here, "I was catapulted out of my body, I lost the research assistant, I lost the clinic, I lost Prague, I lost the planet. I had the feeling that I extinguished in the form that I knew myself, but also the sense that I somehow became everything there was. And I became all of existence." And what Stan had said was he was a different person when he left that session than when he walked into the room. And after that session, he decided he wanted to devote his life to exploring and researching expanded states of consciousness. So in 1967, he was invited to come to Johns Hopkins, where they were using LSD with people dying of cancer. And while he was at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in Baltimore, he participated in the last surviving U.S. psychedelic research program. So right around 1970 was when LSD became illegal. So once LSD was illegal, Stan went on sabbatical and got a contract with Viking Press to write several books about the healing potential of LSD and non-ordinary states of consciousness based on his observations and research. So as fate would have it, in around 1973, while he was on sabbatical, he happened to be at a party in New York with Michael Murphy from the Esalen Institute. And they had a conversation, and Stan tells the story where Michael had asked him, "What are you doing now, Stan?" And Stan had said, "Well, I'm on sabbatical and I'm writing these books. And Michael said, well, would you be interested in becoming a scholar in residence at Esalen? And you could do your writing there, and you can maybe offer workshops to people, experiential workshops to people based on your work. So Stan went to Esalen. And originally, I think some of the things I watched, some of the YouTube videos and videos of Stan that I watched, he had said that, you know, he got to Esalen, they were like, hey Stan, do you have a secret stash of LSD that we can still use? And Stan said, well, no, it's legal and I can't, my license doesn't allow me to do that. So he had to be creative, which one thing about Stan, if you know him, one of his primary characteristics is he's an extremely curious person. So he's always exploring and interested in experiencing new things. So we went back to his research and his observations, and he noticed that when he was working with his patients with LSD, and the effects of the drug were starting to wear off sometimes 7 or so hours later, and the session still felt unfinished to the patient, they would start to ask him for some kind of physical intervention or some kind of touch. And so when he would like place his hand on a part of the body and have them breathe into it, that would spontaneously have them going into saccadic, deeper and faster breathing. So what the patients had been reporting was the deeper and faster breathing was helpful for them to come to resolution even after the psychedelic drug had worn off. So this form of deeper and faster breathing was bringing material up from the unconscious into consciousness, and the breather would experience some kind of catharsis or a memory or an emotional release, and that would complete the session. So he knew that there was some kind of connection between the faster breathing and bringing up things from the unconscious. And so they started experimenting with this at Esalen. So in 1974, actually, when Stan was at Esalen, he met his wife, his former wife, Christina Groff, and they developed a non-drug method for accessing deeper levels of the unconscious, and they called that method holotropic breathwork. So what they did was they put together trainings from people to come from all over the world and experience this holotropic breathwork method that they were developing. And while Stan was at Esalen, he had a garden, and he would work in the garden. And what happened was, one day he was working in the garden prior to them having a group of around, I think it was 46 people coming to do a workshop, and he hurt his back. So they thought, you know, we have this big group of people coming, and I can't be on the floor working with them because I hurt my back, so what are we going to do to support them? So they thought, well, let's just divide the group in half, and we'll have half the group breathe and half the group be sitters. And what grew out of that was that the sitters were reporting that they felt that it was a privilege to be with someone in such an intimate process as a holotropic breathwork session. And so they started to include the sitter-breather dyad as part of the holotropic paradigm. And while at Esalen, they also introduced music into the sessions. So there's usually about a 2.5 to 3 hour music set that's played during a breathwork session. And Christina's father was a musician, so she started going through anthropological archives where there were native cultures that developed sound technologies like chanting and drumming and rattling that were designed to induce non-ornery states of consciousness and get people into a trance. And so these native cultures were using things like drumming rhythms, and the drumming rhythms were able to change the synchronization and desynchronization in the brain, and so they started to combine the breath work with this evocative music as a way to help people, support people in their breathwork sessions. So as I mentioned earlier, Stan noticed if the breathing session didn't feel complete and the patient asked for some physical support or intervention, that he termed that physical intervention or touch as focused release work. So when we do body work today, we call it focused release work. And we ask people, if they ask for body work, what we do as a facilitator is we ask them what's happening in their body, and we encourage them to intensify the tension or sensation there, and to express it either as an emotion or let their body move or do whatever it wants to do. And that typically will help people to come to closure or feel like that their session is complete. So the idea with the focused release work is really to help people release physical and emotional blockages or repressed emotions or traumas that may be causing physical or emotional pain for the person. And these releases are termed somatic and cognitive catharsis. So since Esalen, it's been, I guess, maybe 60 years now, and Stan has been researching the healing potential of non-ordinary states of consciousness, and he was actually one of the original founders of transpersonal psychology. So in the 1980s, what happened was many of the people that were actually experiencing holotropic breathwork sessions on the mat with Stan and Christina wanted to have an interest in being able to work with other people using the method. So Stan and Christina began offering holotropic breathwork practitioner training and certification. And around 1998, Stan and Christina decided that they no longer wanted to continue to own and run Groff transpersonal training. So they offered Tab and Carrie Sparks the opportunity to purchase Groff transpersonal training. And Tab actually, unfortunately, passed away a few years ago, but Carrie Sparks, his wife, continues to be the director of Groff transpersonal training and offering a training that certifies individuals as facilitators of holotropic breathwork. And most recently, in May 2020, Stan and his current wife, Brigitte, launched their new international training program in working with holotropic states of consciousness, and they called that Groff Legacy Training. So, as we talk about holotropic breathwork, I want to go a little bit deeper in explaining actually what holotropic breathwork is, other than the deeper and faster breathing. So, the Greek translation for holotropic breathwork, so tropein means orienting or moving towards something, and holos means wholeness. So holotropic breathwork literally translated means moving towards wholeness. And holotropic breathwork is a practice of deeper and faster breathing to enter a non-ordinary state of consciousness. And these expanded states of consciousness have the power to uncover the self-healing potential of the psyche and the body. So these states can also be called technologies of the sacred, or non-ordinary states of consciousness. And so over the years, we've sort of shifted from calling it non-ordinary, because it could have some negative connotations, to just expanded states of consciousness. And the holotropic breathwork process has the capacity to open the psyche temporarily during the session and spontaneously activate each person's intrinsic healing intelligence, or what we call in this work the inner healer. So the concept of the inner healer is this innate healing intelligence or wisdom within each person that allows them to access their own internal resources to heal. So the inner healer is what's directing the experience for each person's session. So this work is very nuanced in that way that each person in each session can be very different. So it's a non-directive process, which means we as facilitators are really not telling you what you need to do to heal. We're not directing the process in any way. In that sense, it's sort of radically self-empowering, because the person that's breathing is essentially guiding their own healing process. So we are there as facilitators in a role of support. So the breath work can look a lot of different ways on the mat. So it's basically deeper and faster breathing. So it could be like, or some people just breathe like not as heavy, but they breathe circular breathing. So it could be like, and the idea is to begin to link the inhale and the exhale so it becomes like circular breathing. And often we say breathe until you're surprised. So the music does help support the deeper and faster breathing. And what happens typically is eventually people drop into an experience and sort of lose the breath. Some people breathe deeper and faster the whole 3 hours. I've seen that over time, but mostly people kind of drop into an experience. And sometimes it's like a wave in a session, like they'll drop into an experience for a while and then they'll sort of come out and then drop in and come out again. Or sometimes they have to get up and use the restroom. And so if people start to come out and come more back into the room again, there are a couple of things that they can do to drop back into their session. So they can certainly, connect to the breath again, start the deeper and faster breathing. They can listen to the music as a guide. They can feel into their body and see what they notice, what physical sensations or emotions they notice in the body. and that typically will bring people back into a session. So I talked about this idea of deeper and faster breathing as one of the premises of holotropic breathwork. But what's interesting is people ask often, like, if I'm going to breathe deeper and faster, isn't that the same as hyperventilation syndrome? And so what Stan found is that the current medical understanding of the effects of faster breathing are actually incorrect. So there are many individuals for whom faster, deeper breathing carried over several hours does not lead to classic hyperventilation syndrome. It actually leads to progressive relaxation. So this is what Stan says, so I'll quote this. Continued faster breathing does not lead to progressive increase in tensions, but tends to be self-limited. It typically reaches climactic culmination, followed by profound relaxation, and a consistent finding of therapeutic work involving rapid breathing is that the symptoms initially keep increasing in intensity, but continued breathing actually brings about the resolution. So that's a little bit of a different perspective on the deeper and faster breathing. And I have never actually seen someone, I've been doing this for 15 years, I don't think I've ever seen anybody go into hyperventilation syndrome. So I think the body has this ability to maintain homeostasis. So the body really does self-regulate during the breathwork sessions and is self-protective, I think, in a lot of ways. So there are a lot of potential ranges of experiences that people can have in a holotropic breathwork session. So a lot of times people say, so what can happen in a session? And the short answer is just about anything. But there are some themes in this work that we see. So people can have biographical, transpersonal, archetypal, physical sensations, a range of emotions, and sometimes birth experiences. So for the range of emotions, people can feel like they're having emotionally charged images that they're seeing. They can feel sense energy moving through the body. Sometimes people have intuitive insights or clarity about situations or issues in their lives. From a sensory perspective, people can feel or see sounds or colors or patterns or shapes, and of course feel physical sensations in the body. And from a biographical perspective, people can experience any kind of memories in the person's life from their physical birth to the present day. And then the transpersonal realm is really the collective unconscious. So it includes things like out-of-body experiences or past life experiences, ancestral memories, mystical or archetypal themes. One thing about this work that I think is really powerful sometimes for people is there's this idea of the permission-giving aspect of holotropic breathwork. So as a psychologist, I've been in a lot of trainings and a lot of healing therapeutic environments with a lot of different modalities. And I don't think I've ever come across anything that's gives as much permission for people to have their experience as holotropic breathwork. So by that I mean, on the mat, if you need to express what you're feeling or experiencing, you can scream, you can cry, you can move around on the mat, you can dance. You really can do whatever you need to do, knowing that you're going to be safe and supported. The only exceptions to that are, we say to people, you don't want to hurt yourself, you don't want to intentionally hurt the facilitators, and you don't want to damage the property. Other than that, we really encourage people to go for it because there aren't many places in the outside world of holotropic breathwork where you can fully express what you're feeling and know that you'll be safe and supported. So I think the permission giving and the non-directive quality of holotropic breathwork is extremely valuable. I think a lot of times, I'm a psychologist, but I know with a lot of my patients, a lot of times when they're having symptoms, there's this DSM classification system where you fit symptoms into a diagnosis. And so I think, diagnosis doesn't typically help a person to heal. It just puts a label on them. So a lot of times, especially I think in psychiatry, psychiatrists are kind of trained or encouraged to medicate symptoms. So they really want to stabilize symptoms for people to help them function better, but that kind of prevents them from getting to the underlying cause of what they're experiencing. And so in holotropic breathwork, we're actually encouraging you to do the opposite. So it can seem counterintuitive, because we're asking you to intensify or amplify what you're experiencing. And in holotropic breathwork, the healing happens with intensification of the symptoms till they get to the point that actually they match the original experience. So we want you to breathe into things and make it bigger, as big as you feel comfortable making it, because what essentially happens is if that experience or feeling has an opportunity to have its fullest expression, it also gives it an opportunity to discharge and to clear and to heal. So that's the kind of underlying premise behind the deeper and faster breathing. Another one, I think, and actually probably Stan's most significant contribution to this work, was this idea of the cartography of the psyche. So, according to Freud, our psychological history begins after we're born. So Freud says the newborn is a tabula rasa, which means a clean slate. So in traditional academic psychiatry and psychology, they use a model or a map of the human psyche that's limited to biographical instincts, postnatal biography, which is everything that happens and shapes our lives after we're born, and the individual unconscious. So based on the research, Stan actually felt that there were two additional domains that needed to be included in the map of the psyche, and those were the perinatal and the transpersonal. Water break. It's a lot of talking. So on the level of the psyche called the perinatal, so peri means near and natal is the birth, so it's related to the gestation and the birthing process itself. So in holotropic states, people can actually relive their own gestation and birth, and Stan feels that if there was a problem there, that becomes the first main important trauma for human beings. And Stan would say we were born physically but not emotionally. So I'm going to do a quote from Stan again. So in holotropic states, unconscious material can surface and be fully experienced. When our process of deep self-exploration takes us back to birth, we discover that reliving every stage of birth is associated with a distinct experiential pattern characterized by a specific combination of emotions, physical feelings, and symbolic images. And Stan refers to these patterns of experiences as the basic perinatal matrices, or birth perinatal matrices. So the birth perinatal matrices are a kind of complex and important aspect of Stan's contributions, and they're beyond what I can talk about in this video, but I would encourage you, if you are interested in the birth perinatal matrices, that there is a lot of the information on that on videos on YouTube by Stan, and also in most of his books. You can read more about this, because Stan did believe that birth was what we call a psychotrauma for people, and that those birth perinatal matrices can have an impact or make an imprint with people that they kind of keep replicating in their lives after they're born. So it's kind of an interesting thing to explore and research. So another important thing about the perinatal is that if you look at the official position of academic psychiatry, they believe that biological birth is not recorded in memory. So they say that the reason for denying the possibility of birth memory is that our cerebral cortex of the newborn is not mature enough to mediate experiencing and recording the birth event. More specifically, the cortical neurons are not what we call myelinized yet, so they're not covered completely with a protective sheath of fatty substances called myelin. And so Stan challenged this concept through his research on the perinatal realm of the psyche, and he believed that birth is recorded in the psyche, and it actually becomes a template for understanding not only how human experience is organized in the unconscious, but that the experiences from birth may actually contain the roots of many of our deepest human struggles. And so that was a really important contribution and distinction in interpreting the impact of your actual physical birth on your psyche. So in addition to the perinatal realm of the psyche, the second domain of Stan's new cartography was called the transpersonal, because it includes experiences in which consciousness transcends the boundaries of the body ego and the limitations of linear time and three-dimensional space. So transpersonal literally means beyond the personal. So holotropic states have the ability to take you where you need to go. So in this work, the psyche directs the process, and there really are no mistakes. It's not directed, as I said before, by a therapist or anybody else. What we do as facilitators is we just prepare people and let their own healing intelligence guide the process. And that's where that idea of radical self-empowerment comes in this work. So there's 3 key components to a holotropic breathwork session: the preparation, the session, and the integration. So the preparation is typically a version of the talk that I'm giving today that's done before people get on the mat. Then you have your actual breathwork session, and then integration, which is almost as important as your breathwork session, because you need these parts of holotropic breathwork in order for it to be therapeutic and not re-traumatizing. So you have to be able to integrate and understand the experiences that you have on the mat and work with them after your breathwork session's complete to continue to move into a place of healing. And at the last day of the workshop, integration is another big and important topic, but the last day of the workshop, we usually give a talk on integration and help people to prepare to leave the workshop and begin to integrate and continue to work with the material that they accessed in their sessions. So there's a lot of different breathwork modalities out there, a lot of wonderful breathwork modalities out there, but in order for it to actually be called holotropic breathwork, there are certain components that need to be present. So it needs to start with a relaxation and a body scan. You need to be breathing deeper and faster. You need to be working in dyad, so there needs to be a breather and a sitter. There needs to be 3 hours of music. Just to talk briefly as we're on this topic. So the music, there's 3 hours of music. The first hour is typically really drumming, activating music. The second hour is what we call breakthrough emotional music. And the third hour is really coming home, like relaxing, peaceful music. Having said that, people's trajectories don't always follow the course of the music set. So the music, another aspect to be called holotropic breathwork, is the body work or the focused release work, and then the mandala drawing after the session. So the mandala is a visual representation or depiction of your session. The word mandala actually in Sanskrit means circle or completion, and it's a way to start the integration process after your session. So when people are invited to draw the mandala at the end of the session, they can either draw, there's a piece of paper with a circle in the center. So we have a lot of art materials in the room. They can draw something in a circle. We have magazines and scissors if they want. They can cut out pictures and do a soul collage. Some people like to journal after a session, so they may write in a journal, or they may write on the back of their mandala as a way to capture the session when it's still kind of fresh. But it is important, I think, for people to continue that process once they get off the mat. So they are invited to do the mandala. And then usually in the evening, there's a sharing circle. So for it to be called holotropic breathwork, all of those components really need to be present. I think a lot of people think they're doing holotropic breathwork, but really for it to be called holotropic breathwork, those components have to be present. In this work, because it can become intense for people, we do have a safe word, and the safe word is stop. So if a breather asks for body work, and while they're receiving the body work, they feel like, okay, they've had enough, all I have to do is say stop, and it stops. So not only can the breather say stop, but the facilitator actually can also say stop. So if someone is like rolling off a mat, or there's a potentially dangerous situation happening and we need to get them more contained, we would say stop. And it's not to stop the session, it's just to kind of redirect somebody back on the mat or to keep them safe. The role of the breather and the sitter. So the role of the breather is just to lay down on the mat and breathe and just kind of surrender at whatever level you can and just allow whatever's arising to come. The role of the sitter is really a role of sacred attention. So you're sort of protecting the space in a sense where you're offering support or care or tissues or water to your breather, or helping them if they have to go to the restroom. Typically we encourage contracts between sitters and breathers. So we would say, if I go like this, I need a drink of water. If I go like this, I need a tissue. If I reach my hand up, I'm going to need to go to the bathroom. We also make contracts around touch. So, the breather and the sitter decide what they're both comfortable with in terms of touch. If the breather needs to hold a hand, ask the sitter to hold their hand, or, if not, the facilitators will come over and provide that. If a breather wants to work, only with a female facilitator or only with a male facilitator, we try to accommodate that if those facilitators are available to work with the person. We tell the sitters most important thing is never leave your breather alone. So if you need to take care of yourself or use the restroom, you raise your hand and one of the facilitators will come over and sit for your breather. It's kind of sometimes it's a powerful experience to be a sitter, but it's also challenging for some people, especially if they're trained in like Reiki or energy healing. We ask to leave all of that kind of stuff out of the room and just allow the person to do their own healing. But it's this idea of doing, non-doing. So doing, not doing. So you are doing something by being present to your breather for 3 hours, but you're not doing anything to your breather. So if the breather is crying, you're not going to hand them tissues unless they ask for them. You're not going to be coming into the breather session in any way unless they invite you. You're just going to be sitting with your presence and attending to your breather with your presence. The same for the facilitators. The facilitators don't come into a breathwork session unless a couple of things are happening. So one would be if the breather asks us to come into a session, we would. If there's a safety issue, we'll come into the session and keep people contained or keep them safe. Or if someone asks for body work, we'll come into the session. We're also very mindful of using our voice in this work. So, the music could be blasting, people could be screaming, and that doesn't tend to pull a breather out of a session. But there's something about the human voice and speaking like I'm speaking now that will pull somebody right out. So the sitter and the breather are not engaged in any conversation typically during the session. When the facilitators come over, we're generally getting close to the breather and talking quietly. When the sessions are coming to resolution and we're checking people out at the end, we're also being mindful to talk low because people may still be in process. So we're mindful of the sound of the human voice and talking during this work also. And the main role of the facilitator really is just to support the process of the breather and to trust their own inner healing nature and not direct it or change it in any way. So what else do I want to say? Oh, I left one other reason out why a facilitator may come into a session. So sometimes people feel like they're choking and they might start like grabbing their throat or really feel like they can't breathe and they get a little panicked. So if we see someone who appears to be choking or panicking because they feel they can't breathe, we will come over and work with them. And we have body work techniques where we use a towel or different things so they can still work with the energy without, grabbing their throat or hurting themselves physically. One other important component of this work is the idea of working with trauma. So there are quite a few people to come into this work that have a trauma history. As a matter of fact, I don't really think most people get through life unscathed without experiencing some kind of trauma. So in this work, there's two kinds of traumas. There's traumas of commission and traumas of omission. So traumas of commission are all kinds of insults or traumas or things that were done to us that should not have happened. So this could be verbal, emotional, or sexual abuse. It could also be things like car accidents or, being diagnosed or treated for a serious medical illness. Anything that the psyche interprets as a threat to your safety or life is considered a trauma of commission. So these experiences typically are not processed in the psyche. So the brain sort of has different mechanisms so that when traumas occur, they tend to stay in the psyche or the unconscious like an unprocessed open program. So they remain in the psyche with a certain charge to them. So in these holotropic states, we have the capacity to sort of open the psyche and open these unfinished, unprocessed, undigested experiences and allow them to become processed so you can work with these traumatic experiences in your session and start to heal them, hopefully. Traumas of omission are things that you didn't get, like you feel like you weren't cared for or held or loved or validated. And when there's traumas of omission, these kinds of situations can be very hard to work on in traditional therapy because you can't really explain in words to someone what it feels like to be held or loved. So in holotropic states, when a person is in like a deep regressive state, it's possible to offer them physical contact. And the physical contact, when it's given in the right way, becomes what we call introjected by the psyche. So it's possible for the person to experience and receive it and repattern the actual imprint in the psyche. So trauma work is really important in this work. I've seen it be really therapeutic for a lot of people. The last thing I'll talk about is this idea of integration. So integration is typically an ongoing process for people because when they get up off the mat, the material can continue to emerge for weeks or months after a session. So it's really important to be mindful about being gentle with yourself and offering yourself self-care, doing things like being in nature or staying connected to the holotropic group that you participated in or the larger holotropic breathwork community, doing things like eating healthy, getting good sleep, journaling, really whatever nourishes you. For people in recovery, reconnecting to their recovery groups is important. For people who have a therapist who understands this work, continuing to process the material with your therapist, journaling, anything creative. So there's a lot of ways to continue to integrate the experience. The other thing that can happen in this work that's kind of unique is something called tetany. For some reason, this tends to happen to newer breathers more often. So tetany is what's called carpal pedal spasm, so it won't hurt you, but during tetany, parts of your body can feel stiff and cramped, and you may feel like you can't move them or they may be difficult to move. It's usually experienced like in the hands, they kind of look like claws and they get tight, but it can also happen in your feet or your lips or other extremities. And the way to work with it is kind of to just gently massage your hands or shake them or vocalize in some way. And Stan describes tetany as the body's armoring itself. So this is what Stan says about tetany. So tetany is caused by the alkalization effect on your body from the deeper, faster breathing you do in a breathwork session. What seems to happen is that faster breathing creates a biochemical situation in the body that facilitates emergence of old emotional and physical tensions associated with unresolved psychological and physical traumas. And this situation actually represents a unique opportunity for healing. So what emerges under these circumstances is unconscious material with strong emotional charge that is the most ready for processing. So the tetany does pass after a while, but it can initially be uncomfortable. So I'll end the talk by talking about just a few things that are really important. So for me, when I offer a workshop, I've been doing workshops for over 10 years now. And what I think is, besides providing all the information, is creating a safe container for people and a supportive space for people. Because I don't think, from what I've seen and learned over the years, is that people are not able to go into difficult or painful things in their sessions if they don't feel like they're going to be safe and they don't feel like they're going to be supported. And I think, one of my intentions where I started offering these workshops, initially I was doing one day and weekend workshops, and I really felt like people weren't coming to full resolution or they weren't really fully integrating experiences in a short period of time. So I started expanding the workshops to double breathworks. And now everybody wants to do double breathworks because in the first session, they can kind of get a sense of dipping a toe in and seeing what it's like. And then as a sitter, they can watch other people's sessions. And so once they get a sense, okay, I have permission to do this, I'm going to be safe and supported. In the second sessions, they really tend to be able to surrender a little bit more into their session. So I tend to offer these multi-day workshops for those reasons. And I also tend to do it in a group setting because I really believe in the healing potential, the holding and the support of the group as another therapeutic part of the breathwork experience when it's done in a group setting. I also think what I've seen over the years is your psyche kind of knows how deep you can drop into this work given the time that you have. So I think the longer time that people have in these workshops, the psyche can kind of drop a little bit deeper and maybe stay in the process longer, rather than if you have to pull everything together after a day or two and kind of get in your car and drive home. In the longer workshops, people can get additional support if they need it. They can stay sort of in the expanded state of consciousness for a longer period of time, and they can have more time to integrate, because I typically do weave a lot of integration activities into my workshops. So what we typically do, again, there's not a lot of rules in holotropic breathwork, but there are some certain agreements that we ask everybody to agree to before we get on the mats. And the first one is confidentiality. So we ask everybody to keep everything confidential that they see and experience and hear in the breathwork sessions within the context of just that particular group. We have people agree to stay for the entire workshop, because sometimes people can get triggered after they get on the mat and they think they want to leave. And so it's kind of not safe to leave when you're in process. So we have people agree to stay for the entire workshop before the first breathwork session. We ask no harm to self, others, or property, no non-prescription drugs or alcohol, anything that would alter your consciousness, and no involving others or acting out sexually, because people can connect to their own sexuality in their sessions, which is wonderful, but we want you to work that out on the mat. We don't want you to project that out onto anybody in the workshop, so everybody can feel safe. One thing we ask people to consider if they're breathing in the morning, the preparation part, do you want to eat before you breathe? Some people want a little bit of food for the energy. Some people want their stomach empty because their diaphragm's moving up and down. So that's something you can consider. We often ask people to bring water bottles in, because often people drink water because their throat gets dry. Also eye masks. Some people bring eye masks because they want to darken the room so they can breathe and have the eye mask on. And often I'll provide earplugs for people because the music is pretty loud, very loud. So I have earplugs available for people who want to wear them. And so that's essentially, a good comprehensive idea of holotropic breath work. What else do I want to say? So when you come into a workshop that I'm offering, typically they're like a Sunday through Thursday or Thursday through Sunday. And the first night we're just having dinner together, and I'm guiding the group in the introductory talk, which is very similar to what you're hearing on this video. And then we're picking partners, and we're having our opening circle, and we're kind of getting to know each other and set up a safe container. And then the next 2 days are usually consecutive double breathwork days. And weaved into that, we usually have some integration activities, typically a sound bath, sometimes mask making, sometimes creating art altars in nature, integrative writing, a whole bunch of sometimes dance, like expressive dance. So we integrate a lot of different kinds of integrative activities into the workshop. And then the last morning, we usually have the talk on integration and the closing circle and some kind of nature-based art activity. So it's a pretty full workshop. It's very immersive in nature and sometimes intensive in nature. But I found that people really seem to benefit from the workshops. And sometimes people come and they have the experience and they're like, that was great, but this is not for me, which is fine also. And some people come and, like me, my first session, do the holotropic breathwork, and are like, it became pretty clear to me after I did my first session that this was going to be my path of healing. So it's, to each his own. But, if you're interested, you're certainly welcome to come to any of our breathwork workshops. My next one's coming up January 7th to the 10th, 2025 in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. And then I've sort of shifted out of my private practice as a psychologist, and I'm now offering holotropic breathworks full-time as my practice for people, to work with people. So in 2025, I'll be doing 7 holotropic breathwork workshops. So there's a lot of opportunities to breathe if you feel called to do this work. My email is drmcglynn6@gmail.com. So it's drmcglynn6@gmail.com. And I also have a website, which is my name, so it's www.drmcglynn.com. It's been a long video. And on there is an upcoming workshops page that lists all the upcoming workshops where you can get more information. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope I was able to present that material clearly and in a way that felt helpful to you. And again, feel free to be in touch with me, and hopefully we'll see you at one of the workshops. Take good care.